Case 1. Ethan Crumbly. Ethan Crumbly was just 15 when he walked through the halls of Oxford High School, carrying something far more sinister than a backpack. On November 30th, 2021, what seemed like an ordinary school day shattered into unthinkable horror. Surveillance video later revealed him emerging from a bathroom, eyes cold, brandishing a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, and unleashed a meticulously planned massacre that would claim 4 lives and wound 7 others. In the days and hours before the carnage, Ethan had begun spiraling. A private journal exposed violent fantasies, including torturing tiny creatures and a deeply expressed desire to kill classmates. "Hopefully my shooting will cause Biden to get impeached," he allegedly wrote. Friends testified that he confessed, "I need to kill again." Despite these alarming red flags, the warning signs were ignored. A teacher discovered a chilling drawing of a gun on his desk. School officials summoned his parents and urged them to seek help, yet disregarded the threat, and crucially, failed to secure the weapon lying unlocked at home. At 12:51 p.m., panic erupted across the school. The gunfire echoed through the corridors. Ethan calmly aimed at fleeing students, walking room to room, shooting until his magazine was empty, and ultimately, until there were no more targets. When he encountered school resource officers, he surrendered without resistance. Within minutes, the nightmare was over, but the scars remained. As the legal proceedings unfolded, they exposed haunting truths. Defense psychologists described him as a feral child, severely neglected, mentally ill, and trapped in his own dark psyche. One testified that he experienced psychosis, hearing voices, hallucinating, desperate for help he never received. Yet the prosecution painted a far more chilling portrait. A calculated predator who studied maps of the school, sought ammunition, silenced his ears with toilet paper to muffle gunfire, and even checked which Michigan prison held teens. In October 2022, Crumbly pleaded guilty to murder, terrorism, and assault. The following December, Judge Kwame Rowe, balancing his age and psychological trauma against the sheer brutality and premeditation of his actions, handed down a sentence that stunned many: life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 24 years. As he stood before the court, Ethan offered a sorrowful apology. "Any sentence that the victims ask for, I ask that you do impose it on me." But whether remorse was genuine or rehearsed, it echoed hollowly in the quiet courtroom. The court also focused scrutiny on his parents, James and Jennifer Crumbly, charged with involuntary manslaughter for enabling their son's access to the gun. In April 2024, both were convicted and sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. Their negligence, the prosecution argued, created a tragic opportunity, an opportunity Ethan cruelly seized. Case 2. Aiden Fucci. The night before Mother's Day 2021, in the quiet Florida neighborhood of Durbin Crossing, 14-year-old Aiden Fucci slipped out of his house and messaged a girl who trusted him. Her name was Tristan Bailey, a 13-year-old cheerleader with a bright smile and a spirit that lit up every room. It was after midnight when she followed him into the darkness, both of them just kids, wandering suburban streets as if nothing bad could ever happen to them. Hours later, Aiden came back home alone. He was seen on security cameras carrying his white Nike sneakers, his face calm, moving with an eerie casualness. But Tristan never returned. Her family woke on Mother's Day to an unthinkable nightmare. She was gone, and soon the entire community was searching woods and retention ponds, calling her name, praying she'd come home. By evening, those hopes turned to horror. Tristan's body was discovered in a wooded area, lying in the dirt, her life stolen in a frenzy of violence. She'd been stabbed 114 times. So many of those wounds were defensive, signs that she had fought for her life until her last breath. The brutality of it stunned detectives and tore at the hearts of even the most seasoned investigators. Police came for Aiden Fucci quickly. They found bloodstains on his clothes, and the story he tried to tell crumbled under the weight of evidence. A knife missing from his kitchen matched fragments lodged in Tristan's skull. The surveillance footage showed him returning alone, and when he was taken into custody, he posed for a chilling selfie in the back of a patrol car, flashing a peace sign, captioning it, "Has anybody seen Tristan?" as though her murder was some twisted joke. The truth came out in court. Aiden led Tristan into the woods that night and attacked her without mercy, stabbing her over 100 times before leaving her alone beneath the trees. No one could comprehend how a boy who sat in classrooms, laughed with friends, and seemed like any other teenager could harbor such monstrous violence. His friends later revealed he'd often talked about killing people just for fun. But no one believed him until it was far too late. When Aiden finally stood before the judge in 2023, his voice was barely a whisper as he pleaded guilty. He apologized to Tristan's family, but the courtroom was filled with a silence so heavy it felt like it might crack the walls. Her family spoke of birthdays that would never come, of cheer routines left incomplete, of the bright future that died in those woods. Her sister dropped 114 aqua-colored stones into a glass jar, one for every stab wound, the soft clicking echoing like distant thunder, a sound no one present would ever forget. Aiden Fucci was sentenced to life in prison, though the law would allow him a chance for parole after 25 years. But no number of years behind bars could erase the savage violence of that night or bring peace to the community that lost a child whose only mistake was trusting the wrong friend. The question that now hangs in the air, haunting everyone who knows this story, is how a boy so young could turn so cold, and how close to home true evil can sometimes be. Case 3. Raymond Child III. Raymond Child III was just 17 when a suburban Indiana home transformed into a chamber of terror in the early hours of January 24, 2021. It was the kind of night when silence weighs heavy, as Indianapolis police responded to frantic 911 calls around 3:43 a.m. A teenage boy, his chest riddled with bullets, lay wounded on the porch. With fading strength, he gasped his brother's name, Raymond Child III. In that moment, the unimaginable became real. Inside the house, 6 lives were stolen in cold blood. His father, stepmother, 2 siblings, his brother's girlfriend, and even her unborn child. The youngest victim, just 13, and a pregnant young woman were both executed in a relentless onslaught no one could fathom. What triggered such carnage? Family members say a simple argument. Raymond broke curfew after borrowing his father's car. When he returned home past midnight, a heated exchange ensued. His punishment was a reprimand, and that warning was all it took. He walked away, returned with 2 9mm handguns, and methodically went from room to room, opening fire on those who loved him. A brother's account revealed he pleaded during the attack, "Please don't kill me," before being shot multiple times and left for dead. Police found Raymond's bloody clothes, recovered the guns from family members who handed them over, and arrested him the next day at another relative's house. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the violent predator with the teenager who once participated in youth music programs, showed promise, and walked the same streets as his victims. The trial was a dramatic seesaw. In July 2024, jurors witnessed heated exchanges and emotional testimony, only to see the session end in a mistrial when a witness confronted Raymond mid-testimony. Tension filled the courtroom again in October. After just 5 days of deliberation, the jury returned and found him guilty on all counts: 6 murders, attempted murder, and illegal possession of a firearm. On March 10, 2025, a Marion County judge delivered justice with a 360-year sentence, essentially 6 consecutive life terms, ensuring Raymond Child III will never be free again. No remorse echoed through the courtroom. Prosecutors spoke of the horror, calling the atrocity unfathomable and praising the families for their courage during the trial. Case 4. Eric Smith. In the summer of 1993, the sleepy village of Savona, New York, awoke to a nightmare no one could have imagined. 4-year-old Derek Roby, kissed goodbye by his mother that morning, skipped off toward summer camp. A short distance away, 13-year-old Eric Smith pedaled through the same streets, his red hair catching the sun. What followed would shatter that calm forever. Moments later, Derek vanished. Alarm rippled through the community as hours ticked by. A search turned frantic when, in a nearby wooded patch, his lifeless body was discovered. The worst fears realized. He had been strangled, bludgeoned with rocks, and subjected to a crime so brutal that the word gruesome barely scratches the surface. His own lunch items, Kool-Aid and a banana, were found smeared near his body in a macabre tableau. When police began questioning Smith, his facade of innocence slowly crumbled. He described things only the killer could know. The way Derek's shirt looked, how he moved. A reenactment video showed his words and actions misaligned, suggesting deception. Then, in a stunned confession, he uttered to his mother and grandfather, "I killed that little boy." Eric's trial dominated national headlines. Despite being just 13, he was tried as an adult in one of New York State's most harrowing juvenile murder cases. Testimony revealed a pattern of bullying at school and emotional distress at home. Yet none of that softened the jury's view when they listened to the chilling details. The lure into the trees, the fatal blows with rocks, the sheer violence of it all. Convicted of second-degree murder in August 1994, he received 9 years to life, the maximum allowed for juveniles. Decades of stolen childhood years followed. Smith spent time in juvenile detention before transfer to adult prisons. His parole hearings became ritual. For nearly 20 years, the Roby family braced for the possibility of his release. He was denied parole 10 times between 2002 and 2020. Then, in October 2021, it happened. 28 years after Derek's death, the parole board approved his release. He finally walked free from prison on February 1, 2022, moving into Queens under supervision. For many in Savona, the return of the boy who once killed in their woods was unthinkable. Derek's mother, Doreen, vowed not to give him power over her thoughts, yet the trauma lingered in every corner of that village. Today, Smith lives far from the crime scene, claiming he's changed. He speaks of remorse, of healing through faith and education, of wanting to help bullied children, yet millions still debate whether he can ever atone. And while his parole may have closed one chapter, the blood-soaked woods of Savona remain etched in the memories of those who knew Derek. Case 5. Joshua Phillips. On November 3, 1998, the quiet streets of Jacksonville, Florida, felt safe until young Maddie Clifton never made it home. That afternoon, 8-year-old Maddie, known to her family as Giggles, was playing golf in her front yard, surrounded by laughter and sunshine. Across the street, 14-year-old Joshua Phillips was inside his house, his mother out running errands. A routine day for neighbors, but a storm was brewing behind closed doors. When Maddie vanished, the neighborhood snapped into action. Hundreds joined the search. The FBI and National Guard combed woods, sewers, and backyards. The effort lasted 6 harrowing days. All the while, Joshua wielded a dark secret. He was part of the search, modeling innocence even as guilt consumed him. Then on day 7, Maddie's mother, Melissa, stepped into Joshua's bedroom. She noticed water on the floor and sensed something wasn't right. Her heart pounded. She lifted the waterbed mat and discovered Maddie's body hidden beneath. Maddie had been brutally beaten with a baseball bat, stabbed repeatedly, and her throat slashed. The neighborhood's worst fears had come true. Police moved swiftly. Joshua was arrested at school that same day. Initially, he claimed it was an accident. Maddie had started bleeding from a baseball to the eye, and he panicked, leading him into a horrific cycle of violence to silence her cries before his father came home. But detectives found his story too convenient. No blood splatter was found outside. The house showed no sign of a struggle. His narrative was crumbling under the weight of evidence. Inside the courtroom in 1999, the tension was thick with anticipation. Families, jurors, and the media listened as the state painted a chilling picture. Prosecutors argued the attack was not a tragic accident, but a calculated sexual violence concealed by murder. Bloodied evidence, motive hints, and irregularities in Joshua's account pierced the air. Defense lawyers offered no witnesses, leaving him to be defined by the prosecution's narrative. In just 2 days and 2 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Joshua was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole, even though he was just 14 at the time. Behind bars, Joshua faded into obscurity. He pursued education, became a model inmate, and earned paralegal certification. He remained silent, refusing to personally apologize to the Clifton family, maintaining that only an in-person apology could carry sincerity. In 2017, following the Supreme Court's ruling that mandatory life sentences for juveniles are unconstitutional, he was resentenced, but once again received life in prison, with eligibility for review after 25 years. Now, in 2025, Joshua's case is back in court. His lawyers argue his youth, family trauma, and good behavior deserve a second chance. His victim's family is prepared to speak again. Maddie's older sister, Jessie, has prepared a powerful impact statement, sending a chilling reminder: Maddie didn't get a second chance. Her killers should be too. Case 6. Lionol Tate. In the sweltering Florida summer of July 1999, 6-year-old Tiffany Eunick was left in the care of her cousin's family in Broward County. Watching WWF SmackDown downstairs, Tiffany and 12-year-old Lionol Tate played under the unassuming gaze of Lionel's mother, a Florida Highway Patrol trooper who dozed upstairs. But within minutes, ordinary laughter turned into a nightmare. When Tiffany's mother discovered she wasn't breathing, she was carried to an ambulance, already lifeless and broken. The autopsy was brutal. A fractured skull, broken ribs, a shredded liver, internal bruising, equivalent to a fall from 3 stories, according to tissues analyzed by medical examiners. At just 12, Lionel became the youngest person in modern U.S. history sentenced to life without parole. The jury heard that he had imitated wrestling moves he saw on television, but the evidence spoke a far darker truth. Judge Joel Lazarus famously declared his actions were cold, callous, and indescribably cruel, describing the crime not as roughhousing gone wrong, but as deliberate and horrifying. Cell phone video cameras filmed of Lionel's tearful acceptance of the sentence, handcuffs clinking, his face a mixture of innocence and guilt against the lifeless weight of a courtroom verdict. Suspense built as the public and media questioned, was this a tragic accident or something more sinister? Amnesty groups and even Tiffany's own mother petitioned for mercy, arguing a child shouldn't face lifelong punishment. And shockingly, only 2 years later, an appeals court ruled Lionel hadn't been properly evaluated, his youthful mind ignored. His life sentence was invalidated. In 2004, Lionel pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. With the clock already ticking on his time behind bars, he was released to a year of house arrest and probation, freed from the shadow of life imprisonment. But his story didn't end there. By 2005, he was embroiled in armed robbery and probation violations. A 2006 conviction added decades to his record. The judge warned, "Lionol Tate, you've run out of chances." Additional charges and a no-contest plea in 2008 plunged him back into prison on concurrent 30- and 10-year sentences, landing him in the Hamilton Correctional Institution Annex. Case 7. Jacob Inds. On a cold December night in 1992, 16-year-old Jacob Ind returned home in Woodland Park, Colorado, with a darkness lurking behind his eyes. What began as another routine evening inside a picture-perfect suburban home quickly spiraled into a horror no one in that quiet mountain town would ever forget. By early morning, Jacob's mother and stepfather had been savagely murdered, victims of a brutal attack that shocked the entire community. In the grip of those hours, Jacob and a friend allegedly carried out a meticulously violent plan. Both victims shot, stabbed, and even doused with bear spray in an assault that lasted minutes, but left a lifetime of trauma. The level of brutality seemed inconceivable for a teenager hiding behind a facade of normalcy and routine. As news spread, local schools locked down. Children huddled at home while parents peered anxiously out windows, fearful the murderer might still be among them. When police arrested Jacob at school the next day, he offered only flat, controlled statements, each word measured, his expression eerily detached. In the first trial of 1994, he was tried as an adult, and jurors heard chilling testimony. Jacob confessed to recruiting an older teen to help execute the plan, and never once showed remorse when the verdict was read. Instead, he stood impassive as the judge sentenced him to life without parole. Yet the story didn't end there. Years later, defense lawyers exposed a hidden truth. Jacob had been repeatedly abused in the home he destroyed. Testimony revealed verbal threats, physical assaults, even sexual abuse, elements that were barred from his original trial, leaving the jury unaware of his reality. The courtroom astonished observers when an appeals judge vacated his sentence, citing Jacob's right to testify in his own defense. As he returned to court nearly 3 decades later, now in his 40s, Jacob spoke for the first time, his voice weighed down by years of confinement and regret. He pleaded not guilty to the original charges and finally told his story. He lived in fear, fighting to survive every day in a home ruled by violence. Still, prosecutors argued that despite the trauma, the murders were planned, and the result, the death of 2 parents, was irrevocable. In 2019, Jacob pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 60 years, with credit for the time he already spent behind bars. Case 8. Michael Hernandez. In the quiet halls of Southwood Middle School in Palmetto Bay, Florida, 14-year-old Jamie Goff lived a normal life. Straight-A grades, violin recitals, dreams for the future. But on that chilling February morning in 2004, the school's vibrant corridors became a crime scene. Jamie vanished from a bathroom stall. Teachers and students would soon discover the unthinkable. He had been stabbed more than 40 times, his throat slashed, his lifeless body hidden in a stall that should have been safe. One student, Michael Hernandez, also 14, re-entered the bathroom shortly afterward. Blood spattered across his clothes betrayed him. He'd lured Jamie there under false pretenses. As police closed in, Hernandez didn't flee. He calmly continued to class. It was only when the teacher confronted him that the horror became undeniable. Investigators uncovered more than a brutal attack. They discovered obsession. Hernandez kept a chilling mental hit list, studied serial killers online, and spoke openly about desire to murder again. It wasn't a crime of impulse, it was calculated. He had planned, executed, and concealed his violence with unnerving composure. The atmosphere during his trial was electric with tension. The prosecution detailed the gore, the premeditation, the unnatural calm of a boy who should have been grieving, not killing. Hernandez tried to plead insanity, but jurors were unmoved. In 2008, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Years later, the Supreme Court's decision on juvenile life sentences reopened his case, but hopes for mercy were crushed again. In 2016, an appeals court reaffirmed his life term, citing his fascination with death metal and serial killers as proof that his violent intent hadn't changed. In 2021, news came that Hernandez had died behind bars, 31 years old, found unresponsive in his cell, likely victim to cardiac issues linked to obesity. His death shocked families on both sides. Jamie's father said it offered no peace, only reopened wounds. Even Hernandez's own family mourned, caught in the tragic intersection of victim and perpetrator. Case 9. Robert Bever. On a humid summer night in July 2015, the Bever house on Magnolia Court in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, became the site of unimaginable horror. Inside the 2-story suburban home, a family of 7 was under siege. Not from strangers, but from 2 of their own. 18-year-old Robert Bever and his 16-year-old brother Michael had quietly prepared for weeks, collecting knives, hatchets, body armor, and even plotting to capture their violence on camera. Their goal wasn't only to kill their family, but to launch a nationwide killing spree that would eclipse every mass murder they'd read about. Just before midnight, the first blows fell. In chilling detail later recounted in confessions, Robert and Michael attacked their parents, David and April Bever, stabbing them repeatedly. From there, they moved through the house methodically, targeting their younger siblings one by one. 5-year-old Victoria and 7-year-old Daniel were killed in their bedrooms. 12-year-old Daniel, gravely wounded, managed to flee outside, leaving a trail of blood on the driveway as he tried to summon help. 13-year-old Crystal, too, was stabbed multiple times, left for dead, but she survived and would become a key witness against her brothers. Police arrived to a scene of chaos and carnage. Inside the house, blood-covered walls and floors, signs of a struggle in nearly every room. In the backyard, officers found Robert and Michael hiding in the dark brush, stained with blood, calm and compliant as they were taken into custody. Investigators uncovered evidence of their larger plans: maps, lists of intended future victims, and online searches about infamous killers. Robert later admitted they wanted to become famous, inspired by stories of Columbine and other mass tragedies. Robert Bever was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 of assault and battery with intent to kill. In 2016, he pleaded guilty and received 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Michael, tried separately, was convicted in 2018 and sentenced to life in prison as well. The Bever home, once a place of family life, stood empty after the murders, its windows dark, the walls hiding echoes of violence. The house was eventually demolished, replaced by a community memorial garden. Yet the memory of what happened there lingers like a stain, a reminder that behind any suburban door can lie secrets darker than anyone dares to imagine. Case 10. David Brom. In the dead of night on February 18, 1988, David Brom, then 16, entered his Rochester, Minnesota family home armed with an axe. What unfolded next would haunt the community for decades. His mother Paulette, father Bernard, sister Diane 13, and brother Richard 11 were discovered brutally murdered, each struck repeatedly. The weapon, blood-stained and discarded in the basement, would become one of the most infamous pieces of American true crime history. Police initially believed Brom had fled, or worse, been abducted. But a friend's chilling testimony changed everything. She revealed that David had confessed his deadly actions earlier that morning, describing how he attacked his father. He kept hitting his dad, and his dad kept on getting up, before moving on to his mother and siblings. Later that day, he turned himself in at a local post office, his punk hairstyle and pale calm belying the atrocity he'd committed. When he faced trial in 1989, Brom pleaded both not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity. In Phase 1, the jury weighed whether he intentionally killed his family and found him guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. In Phase 2, he sought to argue mental illness, with one psychiatrist suggesting his motives were driven by severe depression and an urge to end his own life. But the court ruled he understood right from wrong at the time of the killings. He received 3 consecutive life sentences, plus another concurrent term, totaling over 52 years, before he could even seek parole. Memories of that somber Friday still linger in Rochester. Neighbors remembering faded school friends' seats and impromptu school bus rides to the funeral convey the collective trauma that gripped the town. Investigators and locals alike described the murders as the worst massacre in the city's history. Decades later, Minnesota passed a law in 2023 enabling juvenile offenders with life sentences to petition for parole, and Brom became eligible. According to recent reports, he is now poised for release into a work-release program or halfway house, raising chilling questions about the road between juvenile violence and adult redemption. To this day, no motive explains the carnage. Brom's attorney suggested impulsivity in a state of emotional collapse, but neighbors and family remain torn between shock, compassion from Brom's relatives, and enduring grief for the lives lost. For over 30 years, his case has defied easy answers, an anguished combination of a promising life destroyed and a family erased in a single terrifying night. Case 12, Michael Carneal. On the chilly morning of December 1, 1997, at Heath High School in West Paducah, Kentucky, students gathered for a prayer meeting outside the gym. 14-year-old Michael Carneal arrived early, concealing a loaded Ruger 22 in his backpack and earplugs in his ears. A teenager carrying more than just textbooks. As he approached, he suddenly began shooting, unleashing a barrage of bullets into the circle. 3 girls were killed: Nicole Hadley, Jessica James, Case Steger, and 5 others were wounded. Carneal dropped his gun, surrendered to the principal, and whispered a terrifying admission: "Kill me, please. I can't believe I did that." What made this ripple of horror feel all the more surreal was Carneal's outwardly ordinary life. He wasn't a loner who lurked in shadows. He had friends, a girlfriend, even mild discipline issues like stealing nunchucks and pranks at school. He'd also harbored secret anxieties, covering vents and windows, obsessively showering with towels, and hiding under his bed as he sheltered from perceived watchers. Before the shooting, he stockpiled guns, rifles, shotguns, ammunition, and warned classmates, "Something big is going to happen on Monday." But nobody took him seriously. During the trial in October 1998, Carneal pleaded guilty but mentally ill, acknowledging his actions. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. His case ignited heated nationwide debate. Families sued video game developers and movie studios for violent content, claiming these shaped Carneal's deadly precision. Decades later, Natural-Born Killers author Stephen King asked that his novel Rage, once found in Carneal's locker, be pulled from circulation to prevent copycat violence. Inside prison, Carneal received psychiatric diagnoses, dysthymia, schizotypal traits, and eventually paranoid schizophrenia. He began medication, therapy, and even expressed remorse in parole hearings, calling himself not really a violent person. Yet when he became eligible in 2022, parole was unanimously denied, citing the enduring weight of his crimes and the lifelong suffering he inflicted. Case 13. Brendan Dassey. In the fall of 2005, in the quiet fields and scrapyards of Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, a young woman named Teresa Halbach vanished without a trace. She'd been last seen visiting the Avery Salvage Yard, a family-run business sprawling with rusting cars and secrets hidden under the hood. Soon, suspicion fell on Stephen Avery, recently freed after spending 18 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. But as investigators dug deeper, they stumbled upon a story more tangled than they could have imagined. A story that pulled in Avery's 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey. Brendan was quiet, shy, and struggled in school, often drifting through his classes without drawing much attention. But in November 2005, police brought him in for questioning. He sat under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, flanked by two seasoned detectives who circled him with questions, gentle voices masking relentless pressure. For hours, they nudged him toward a story in which he and his uncle committed unspeakable acts in a trailer on the salvage yard property. Brendan mumbled halting admissions, then took them back, then admitted them again. His words wavered, uncertain, like a boy trying to guess the right answer to a test he didn't understand. By the end of the interrogation, Brendan confessed to rape and murder, describing horrors in a flat voice. But the details were riddled with contradictions. There was no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, no fingerprints, no DNA. Still, his recorded confession became the linchpin of the prosecution's case. In 2007, Brendan stood in a courtroom staring at the floor while prosecutors painted him as a willing accomplice in Teresa Halbach's brutal killing. A jury found him guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and sexual assault. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of release until at least 2048. Years later, judges and lawyers battled over whether Brendan's confession had been coerced. One federal court ruled it unconstitutional, citing his youth and mental limitations, but that ruling was overturned. Appeals went all the way to the Supreme Court, but relief never came. Now, Brendan Dassey remains behind bars, his fate tied to a confession many believe he never truly understood. Outside the prison walls, the debate still rages, echoing through courtrooms and homes, leaving a single haunting question hanging in the air. Was Brendan Dassey a killer, or just a frightened boy who said what the adults wanted to hear? Case 14. Kip Kinkle. In the spring of 1998, 15-year-old Kip Kinkle's life began to fracture under a mounting weight of frustration and hidden voices. A straight-A student trapped behind dyslexia, he'd grown increasingly withdrawn after being suspended for bringing a stolen handgun to school. But no one, neither parents nor teachers, could have predicted the darkness that followed. On May 20th, he returned home carrying a Ruger .22 caliber rifle. The voices in his head, which he'd hidden for years, urged him onward. He entered the house late that afternoon. His father, a Spanish teacher, sat unsuspecting in the kitchen. Kip fired once in the back of his head, then dragged the body into the bathroom. Hours later, he lay in wait in the garage for his mother's return. When she emerged, he shot her multiple times, behind the head, in the face, in the chest, before covering both bodies with blankets. The Wagner area Liebestod played on repeat in the background, the haunting notes a soundtrack to his unraveling. On a coffee table lay a note, an eerie confession. My head just doesn't work right. God damn these voices inside my head. I have to kill people. I don't know why. I have no other choice. The next morning, Kip drove his mother's minivan to Thurston High School, trench coat concealing 2 pistols, a rifle, a hunting knife, and over 1,000 rounds of ammunition. As breakfast unfolded in the cafeteria, he opened fire, hitting 2 students fatally and wounding 24 more. Then, mid-spree, he paused to reload, only to be tackled by classmates who forced him to the floor until police arrived. Kip never spoke again during arrest, but his eyes pleaded, "Shoot me, kill me," he reportedly said to officers. Seized, shackled, mute, he became the face of a national tragedy unfolding before the age of 16. In court, he pleaded guilty to murder and attempted murder, foregoing an insanity defense. He received a prison sentence totaling 111 years, with no possibility of parole. Still, subsequent filings revealed he suffered paranoid schizophrenia triggered by hallucinations, voices that had commanded him since age 12. His defense argued that mental illness had stolen control, but the plea deal held firm. Now incarcerated, Kip takes antipsychotic medication and has earned a GED. His sister, Kristen, visits often, believing the boy she once knew still exists behind the murky divide of illness. Survivors of the shooting have carried on, some even becoming advocates, like trombonist Tony Case, whose limp is a permanent reminder of that day. If these stories made you think twice, if they gripped you, shocked you, or left you craving to know what lies beneath the surface, hit that subscribe button now and join the Mindframe True Crimes family. Every week, we dive deeper into the hidden corridors of the human mind, unraveling the truths behind the headlines and the secrets even courtrooms can't fully reveal. And to all my loyal subscribers and returning viewers, thank you for keeping your mind in the frame. You're the reason we can keep shining a light into the world's darkest corners. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, the mind is the most dangerous place of all. This is Mindframe True Crimes. Until next time.